All right, guys. Sacramento Kings. I don't know about you guys, but I'm personally pretty excited to get into these guys. They're going to be aggressive this summer. They're probably going to try to do something to get them back to the level of success that they had last year. Maybe they could try to swing for an all-star type trade. They also have the Malik Monk free agency. I'm going to get into that and just go over some couple roster builds, see what the team could ultimately look like. And please don't forget to like and subscribe if you haven't already. It's still a pretty new channel and will help with its growth a lot. So let's take a look at the Kings payroll and see what their situation is like so far. And the biggest thing to note is that I think their payroll starting to add up pretty quickly. And if assuming that they re-sign Malik Monk, they're going to be right at or even above that $171.3 million luxury tax threshold, which they're not going to want to exceed this coming year, especially given their result last year. Now, ideally, I think the Kings want to keep their top six guys. They're all pretty important. Maybe they want to try to upgrade on Harrison Barnes or Kevin Herter, but just given their roles, I think those are pretty great contracts. However, I am going to keep an eye on these three guys for trade purposes. Sasha Vezenkov, Davion Mitchell, and Chris Duarte, they were not mainstays of the rotation, and moving them can help them reshape the end of their bench a little bit. There was a report that came out yesterday that Vezenkov informed the Kings that he will not be returning to them. Davion Mitchell, I think he's extremely expendable now, especially given the development of Keon Ellis, who's just a much, he's like the actualized version of what the Kings were hoping Davion Mitchell to be, and he's much cheaper. And then you've got Chris Duarte, just another guy that I think that they don't really need to prioritize. And altogether, that's $19 million in effectively dead money occupying the payroll. So if you can combine those players to trade for a useful rotation player or potentially even get off them completely, you can open up a lot more flexibility below the luxury tax towards keeping Malik Monk and even bringing in another guy. And then the other thing to note with their situation is they will be having access to the full non-taxpayer mid-level exception at just under 13 million. However, assuming they keep the same general roster build and re-sign Monk, it's unlikely they're going to have enough flexibility to use it. But there is a way they could potentially use it while keeping Monk, and I'll get into that a little later. All right, Malik Monk. So this is the most that the Kings can offer him this offseason with his early bird rights. It is a 175% raise off his $9.5 million salary from last year, so would start him at $17.4 million, can go up to 4 years, pays him nearly $20 million a year. That'd be pretty similar to what some of the other high-end backup guards in the league, like Colin Sexton, Norman Powell, Gary Trent Jr. have been making. So it'd make him one of the higher-paid reserves in the league for guards. Now, he's been linked to several teams in free agency, teams like the Magic and Pistons, for example. And those teams have cap space. They can offer more money to him than the Kings are able to offer. Now, it's possible that interest from other teams could drive up his price to at least get the Kings to pay him that full amount that they're able to. But if he does leave, it's kind of a worst case scenario for the Kings because all they'd have left to potentially replace him is that mid-level exception starting at just below 13 million, and I highly doubt they'll be able to find someone as better or even as good as him with it. But let's say Malik Monk doesn't return. He gets outbid from some other team for way more than the Kings can offer. Would that open up the flexibility for the Kings to pursue an all-star? They've been linked in the past to guys like OG Anunoby, Pascal Siakam, so there's clearly an appetite for them to get another expensive forward. So I'm going to use Brandon Ingram as an example. Not someone who's really been linked to the Kings, but he is seems to be one of the more gettable all-star level forwards on the market right now. I don't love the fit in Sacramento, but I could see them going for it if he really is the best player they could possibly get. So let's say they do a 3-team deal with the Pelicans and Wizards. They send Barnes and a future first, maybe a second one to the Pelicans to get Ingram. And then they get the Wizards involved. The Wizards, with their various trade exceptions, absorb Sasha Vezenkov, Davion Mitchell, Chris Duarte. And in exchange for that, they swap the 13th overall pick for the 26th overall pick. There's just something I put together, I think, that could make sense for all sides. So then this would be the Kings' payroll for next season if they do that trade. Brandon Ingram has a trade bonus. It would increase his salary a little bit. And they still have some flexibility to use a portion of the non-taxpayer mid-level exception. Not the whole amount, but a decent amount of it. And they'd still be able to fill up the roster and finish right below the luxury tax. So it seems like a pretty good team. you get a upgrade at the 4 and a younger option there. But the big concern with trading for a player like Brandon Ingram is that he will probably command a max contract. So if you're the Kings, are you prepared to pay that? So here's your payroll next year, assuming that they do re-sign him to a max. I've also have that mid-level exception signing at its second year contract, and they're still able to finish below the luxury tax line, which I'm sure will be important to them. However, their window with this type of roster build might not last beyond this season, and that's because it's going to get really expensive after that. De'Aaron Fox is going to be on the last year of his contract, and he could command a max contract that could pay him more than $50 million a year. Same type of deal as Ingram's. And then Keegan Murray needs to get paid as well. He will be extension eligible the following season. He could command north of $30 million a year at least. So they could be looking at a roster with 3 players making north of $40 million a year, plus Keegan at whatever number he requires. And that's before factoring in whatever it might take to bring back Kevin Huerter. He's going to be on the last year of his deal as well. So they'd be in a pretty similar predicament as the Wolves, except worse because they don't, out of all these max level players that they're paying, not one of them is even a top 10 player. So I'd probably stay away from this build. Just too much money for 3 non-superstars. I don't think this team is particularly great or a legit contender at all, and it'd probably take them pretty deep into the luxury tax in following seasons. Let's go back and say that Malik Monk does resign with the Kings. He takes the maximum he's allowed to get with them, which I do think is probably the more likely scenario with him, anyways. So that would put them right at the tax line. And that could kind of be it for them as far as moves go. Maybe they could do some marginal trades afterwards with some of those guys I mentioned, like with Vezenkov, Mitchell, and Duarte. They can try to combine them. Maybe they can try to get like one good role player who can help them. Something maybe they could consider combining some seconds and trying to get someone like a Bruce Brown or Jonathan Isaac. However, another option, which I think is a little more likely, would be to still salary dump those guys, which could open up the full non-taxpayer mid-level exception. And then maybe they can get another wing player to come off the bench, like a Caleb Martin or Royce O'Neal. So now I'm going to use the Wizards again as an example. And let's say they do a 2-team trade where the Wizards absorb those 3 players and they end up swapping the 13th pick for the 26th overall pick. Now the Kings open up enough flexibility to use the entire non-taxpayer mid-level exception and stay right below the tax after filling out the rest of the roster. But let's take it even further. Let's say the Kings want to make a change to their starting lineup and they decide to move on from Harrison Barnes, get someone a little younger. So I'm going to use Kyle Kuzma as an example, also from the Wizards. So whatever trade they've got going would be expanded. Not the most ideal addition. He's been a worse 3-point shooter than Barnes, but also he's been taken a lot more as one of the higher usage players on the Wizards. So maybe he could go up a little bit in a smaller role with the Kings. Also, though, 3 years younger, and the Kings have traded for him before 3 years ago. But then the Lakers changed their mind and sent Kuzma to the Wizards in that Westbrook trade. So maybe the interest in Kuzma is still there with the Kings. But I'm guessing that they would have to include a future first round pick to get the Wizards interested, which is still less draft equity than is probably required to get Brandon Ingram. So the same trade is also happening with those other role players going to the Wizards, and they get Kuzma as well. And upon getting traded, his salary would increase a little. He's got some trade bonuses and some incentives that would be adjusted. And Malik Monk is back at that full amount that the Kings can give him. And they're able to use a large portion of their non-taxpayer mid-level exception while staying below the first apron because they would be hard capped. They'd be a little bit over the tax, but they can still get below it with a trade later in the season. And if they don't find anyone that they can that they won with the non-taxpayer mid-level exception, they could hold on to it into the season and use it as a trade exception. Now they could take someone that has a contract of no more than 4 years and has a salary no more than that right under $13 million starting amount. It's a new addition to the CBA that's starting this season. And when looking ahead, this roster build is a lot more sustainable than the other one, especially because Kyle Kuzma is on a nice cost control deal that's on a descending scale. So it's just going to get lower each year. And here I filled out the roster. I've got Monk on the second year of his deal, their mid-level signing on the second year of his deal. Trey Lyles, they have enough flexibility to re-sign him. So I've got him at the same amount that he's about to make this season. Or alternatively, they can sign someone else with the mid-level exception. And when they fill out the roster, they'll be in a good position to avoid the tax next season. But even more important is that they'll be in an even much better position to sustain this roster while having to give a raise the following season to De'Aaron Fox and Keegan Murray. It's not the most splashy offseason, but I think this is a more realistic outcome given their payroll situation.